If I said something to help you transform, it is not a reproach, but it is my hope for you. Looking into me, you also see the things that are unskillful and imperfect. And if you said something to me, it is not a criticism or a reproach, but it is only a hope for me to transform. When you transform, I can be happier. And when I transform, you can be happier. We support one another on the path of practice. We need each other. I deeply cherish your presence in our community. So this is the kind of language that we read out and we remind each other before we offer each other feedback. And the feedback, oftentimes, it has to start with flower watering. It means we acknowledge the talents, the goodness, the wonderful things, the wonderful qualities in the other person before we offer them some kind of constructive feedback. And that kind of feedback can sometimes be in the form of maybe you can come to activities on time, something like that. Not so big, but even such a small feedback, you need to offer flowers before you even offer that feedback. Or that kind of shining light. So what I like about this contemplation is just reminding ourselves, reminding each other that we are flowing streams, that we're not separate selves. Because very often when we look at each other on a day-to-day basis, we're often caught in this. You are you and I am me. And in Plum Village, our daily practice is to remove these ideas of our practice is to remove a kind of dualistic thinking that we very often engage in our daily lives. For instance, when we take a step on Mother Earth, when I was walking this morning, it's clear that Mother Earth is not separate from me. But very often when we're walking, we may think, I'm not sure if you in here think like that, but we may think that we're separate from Mother Earth. But when I walk, I take my steps in mindfulness, I can remember actually every ounce of my energy comes from Mother Earth. And so when I recognize that, every piece of carrot, every piece of broccoli that I've eaten, everything that I've consumed to give me energy comes from Mother Earth. So the earth inside is not so different from the earth outside. And when I come back to my steps, and just being with my steps, feeling the contact with the earth, I can get in touch with this truth. Especially when my mind is not so busy, when my mind is not thinking too much or not running, not pursuing things that have already happened or things that will happen, etc. I can get in touch with this truth that I'm not separate from Mother Earth. And when I can experience my mindful step further, I can also see that I'm not separate from Tay. Because without Tay, I don't think for myself, and maybe for most of us, we may never have had the chance to experience walking in such a way, taking a step like that, taking one step and just to be able to enjoy that one step, that one moment, without our minds worrying too much about anything or running after anything. And that, our capacity, our ability to take a step like that is thanks to Tay. So in your step, as you are walking, you can see Tay is walking with you. We can see, we can feel Tay walking with us. So I hope today, for Tay's continuation day, we can, as we're drinking tea, or as we're walking, or as we're eating our meal in mindfulness, that we can experience being with Tay in this way. Tay has shared his energy of mindfulness and and that energy of mindfulness has been shared by the Buddha, and also even before the Buddha's time, mindfulness was also there. So we share this energy together, and when we practice it, we are a part of this stream. You can see yourself as a part of this stream of ancestors who have come before and who have practiced mindfulness. As I was coming back to my breathing, I got in touch with my fear. Fear of losing my thought. Something like that. I think in each of us, we have a lot of fears. If you don't have a lot of fears in your daily life, that means you've practiced very well. But I see for myself, there are a lot of fears. And when I look around, I also recognize a lot of fears present in my brothers and sisters and the friends who are here. And many of these fears, they have their roots in what we call original fear, or you can say original desire. They're two sides of the same thing. And what Tay called original fear. And Tay said, the first fear we have, the original fear, is the fear of death. Because when we were born, when we were first brought into life, given birth, physical birth by our mother, there's a moment that's very, very tense. And it's a life or death moment. We hadn't learned how to take our first breath yet. And in order to take that first breath, there's huge amounts of efforts that we have to do. And the doctor, of course, helped by kind of expelling whatever amniotic fluid we still had left, so that we can take our first breath, so that the baby can cry out. That first cry is the first in-breath the baby is able to make. And in that moment, our fear is born. We tried our best to take that breath. If we couldn't make it, then we die. So the very first fear we have is the fear of dying. Fear of dying. And along with that fear of dying is also the desire to live, the desire to survive. So in that one moment, both the fear of death and the desire to survive are born at the same time. And as babies, of course, we're very vulnerable. We can't do anything on our own. We can't feed ourselves. We can't walk. We can't take care of ourselves. Unlike many different mammals, when they're first born, they can already walk. They can at least do a little bit to fend for themselves. There's a bit more independence. But for us, when we are first born, for human beings, when we're first born, we're completely dependent on the care of another person, on our mother, on our father, on those around us. And so there's a real fear that if there's a real fear that if there's no one around to take care of us, we won't survive. So when you can imagine a baby, if left to its own devices, when you get hungry, you cry out. You cry out as loud as you can in order to, and the first time you discover that crying out as long as you can, someone comes, and then you see, oh, I cry. If I cry as loud as I can, if I make enough noise, someone will come and take care of me, offer me food, offer me a warm blanket. So anytime something unpleasant happens to me, I can cry out and someone will come and take care of me. I have a nephew who I was lucky enough to be home when he was born, and so I got to take care of him for the first few months of his life. And I remember when he was 4 months old, he knew how to hold his milk bottle already. And so I thought, well, if he knew how to hold his milk bottle already, then I can just leave him down. He can hold his own milk bottle, and I can go do something else. And he picked up really quickly that. So I put him down, and I walked somewhere else, and then I came back. And then he saw me, and the first time he was still holding his milk bottle, so I went away again. And then I came back, and he dropped his milk bottle. So then I came up to him, and I picked up his milk bottle, and that was a mistake. Actually, it wasn't a mistake, but it was like a lot of micro calculations happening. Anyhow, I picked up his milk bottle, and I think from there he learned that if he held his own milk bottle, I would leave him. So after that, he refused to hold his milk bottle. And every time, or once or twice, it happened a couple of times later that he would hold his milk bottle, I walked by, and then he would drop it. And then he learned, I don't need to hold my milk bottle. If I hold my milk bottle, she's going to leave me. And yes, so this is, and it seems she's more well-equipped to take care of me than I am of myself, to hold the milk bottle. Anyhow, I'm just imagining these baby conversations going on in him. But I recognize as a baby, babies, they're very intelligent, and they're very smart at getting other people to take care of them. And as Tay said, when we're a baby, we learn how to strategize. This is a way that we strategize in order to survive. For instance, if I cry out as loud as I can, someone will come and take care of me. If I drop my milk bottle, someone's going to hold it for me. Anyhow, I find in the Sangha we do have a few, I won't say brothers, maybe I can identify a sister or two who likes to drop her milk bottle. Because when she does, then someone else can pick it up for her. And I often drop my own milk bottle too. I see I have this as well. I drop my milk bottle and I wait for someone to come and pick it up for me. And that's when I think, oh, it's better to have that person do it for me. Something like that. I don't know if you can recognize these baby habit energies in you. So as babies, we learn how to strategize, and it's for self-preservation. And we can recognize how the need to survive, how the desire to live, how the desire to survive, and the fear of not being able to survive, the fear of death, is still operating in our daily lives. I remember when I was in Deer Park, we learned how to play volleyball. So the brothers were always very good at it, but the sisters, we weren't so good at it yet. So we formed a kind of like a training team. So the brothers, they had an opportunity to train some of the younger sisters to play volleyball. We would line up and they would pass us the ball and we would just keep trying to receive and hit the ball and try to direct it in a good direction, in the right direction. It was quite intensive training for a monastic. But I remember at that time in Deer Park, we had quite a few good volleyball players, and they really knew how to keep the ball from hitting the ground. It means wherever the ball, no matter how far away the ball is or how fast it came, they were always able to catch it, even if at the risk of bodily harm. Like they would dive after it, or dive sideways, dive forward, dive left, dive right, I don't know, dive backwards. And I noticed something as I was playing volleyball, that I could never allow myself to dive after the ball because I was so afraid of falling. And every single time we played volleyball, I knew this habit was so strong in me. And so no matter how much we trained with the brothers, and at one point they did teach us to dive after the ball, I couldn't do it. And the most I could do was just bend one knee and extend my arms to get the ball. But that was the most I could do, to dive after a ball. And so over time, I really noticed this was so strong that no matter how much I tried to imagine myself diving after a ball, I couldn't. And no matter how many times the brothers hit the ball a little bit further away, I couldn't dive after it. I would just bend a knee, extend my arms. If I couldn't make it, that's fine. But I couldn't dive after it. And we even went to the beach sometimes we had outings to the beach. And of course, it was a very nice beach, so just very soft sand, nice sand. Anybody can dive in sand, you fall and you don't get hurt. And I still couldn't do it. And I remember that one day we were at the beach and everybody was teasing me about this. And it's like, no, you can do it. It's easy. Look. And they would fall. Look, fall. I was like, no, it's not easy. But somehow I couldn't do it. But I kept, challenging myself. I kept trying. And then finally I was able to do it. I was able to dive, for maybe the message that was sent 100 times finally came in that I can dive after the ball without getting hurt. I actually did it one time. And I was able to fall. I just fell flat. Basically, it was lucky we were on sand. we were on sand and not on asphalt. In Deer Park, we played volleyball in this old basketball court. So it was like asphalt. And of course, I wasn't going to dive and allow myself to get hurt on asphalt. But I remember the first time I was able to dive in and to catch the ball and to really fall and to realize that, oh, I'm not dead yet. I'm still alive. It wasn't too bad diving after this ball. And then from then on, I could do it. But I needed that one experience to tell me that I was safe and that this was possible. And that I could allow myself. What I realized was I never allowed myself to fall before. And that one time diving, I actually allowed myself to fall. So that was volleyball. But I also noticed in my daily life too, there were many things that I didn't allow myself to do. But it was also out of this sense of self-preservation. For instance, making mistakes. As a novice, you get reminded all the time of things. And I remember every time someone reminded me of something, of course I would explain myself away. No, I did that because that happened, because she did this or he did that, etc. And in my novice days, I remember there was a venerable nun. She was visiting Plum Village and she said, oh, the sisters here, they explain themselves away all the time, because actually one of our fine manners as monastics is when we get reminded of something or corrected about something, then one of our fine manners is just to join our palms and to bow. Join our palms and to bow. So this explaining happened before I learned how to fall in Deer Park, just to let you know. And so as a novice, even the training that we had to join our palms and bow, sometimes I would join my palms and bow, and then I explain myself away. And after that fall in Deer Park, what I realized was it was connected. It was connected. That I couldn't allow myself to make mistakes, just as I couldn't allow myself to fall. And that's why I couldn't even join my palms to bow when someone corrected me and to say, oh yeah, I could do better. I could do better. Because if you say I could do better, it means I made a mistake. And I didn't want to admit that I made a mistake. So it was a real training, I found. After that, I really appreciated that practice of just, every time someone corrected me or reminded me of something, I join my palms and bow. Now I don't really physically do it, but there's a mental bow there. I should do this to show the outer form more make it more obvious. So I wanted to say a little bit more about this self-preservation thing. Or the desire to protect ourselves, to survive, to live, you can say. And our self-preservation, I find it depends on our sense of self. What it is that we want to protect, the kind of self that we want to protect, depends on the kind of the sense of self that we have. And this could be limited to maybe our body, or our self can be even extended to our family. Sometimes we want to protect our family. Well, I wanted to get into this because I find when we learn about Buddhist psychology, especially about store consciousness, so one of the functions of store consciousness, it's very powerful. It has a very strong, powerful ability to appropriate a sense of self and to preserve, protect this sense of self. So for instance, when we look into our, maybe I draw this out. Very classic Buddhist psychology, store consciousness, mind consciousness. And in store, we have all kinds of seeds, right? We have all kinds of seeds. We have seeds of anger, we have seeds of joy, seeds of compassion, seeds of happiness, seeds of anger, etc. And there's this part of store, so all of these seeds, sometimes there's this part of store that goes, oh yes, this seed of compassion is me. This seed of joy is me. The seed of jealousy is not me. So, no, I'm not a jealous person. So anyhow, there's a function in store, whereas each of us, we contain all the seeds. We have every single potential in us, in each one of us. We have all kinds of potentials. The potential to be this, the potential to be that, to a greater or lesser extent, we have all these potentials. But sometimes we look at this storehouse and we say, yes, we just pick and we select, we filter out. Rather than saying, yes, I have all of this, we say, no, I'm this, I'm that. And even our image is also in store consciousness, how we see ourselves, tall, short. All these seeds are also in us, light, dark, or etc. Successful, failure. You name it, it's there. So there's this function in store that we call appropriate, that it can appropriate a self. So you select, and you say, this is me, this is myself. And that the part of stored consciousness that does it, we call it, we have a name for it, it's called manas. So we appropriate and we protect. We protect this self. That's why in Shining Light, when someone goes, oh, you don't seem to be very mindful when you walk to the dining hall, for instance. Maybe there's a reaction in you, or like, I'm mindful when I walk to the dining hall. Well, that's because you don't agree with, you have this sense of yourself being mindful when you do a certain thing, or you have this sense of yourself as being mindful or being whatever. So we have this sense of self, and it's not just about the seeds in our stored consciousness that we appropriate, but we appropriate many, many other things as well. Like, of course, our body, our family, could be our communities. Can you name anything? Can you name something that you identify with, that you think, this is? Friends? Okay. Gender? Did someone say gender? Yeah. Yeah, it could be. Even Brother Fatlai, last time he mentioned about the 4 boxes that we put. This is also a way of appropriating the self. Species, human versus other species. Or we identify ourselves as humans. And maybe somewhere along here you can put political affiliations. Even the earth. Gender. Race. Yes.
Religion.
Culture.
Volleyball team.
Volleyball team. The winning one. Pardon? Surrounding is your environment. Your feelings, yes, we do appropriate. Anything else? Possessions, yes. Don't touch my sweater. This is my sweater. Don't wear my shoes. These are my shoes. Does anyone suffer when someone else wears their shoes? I do. The shoes have become an extension of myself. So depending on your sense of self, the bigger, basically, the more possessions you seem to have, the bigger this sense of self-preservation. You don't want people to touch your family. You don't want people to touch your community. You don't want people to touch your friends, do harm to your friends. You don't want people to slander your sense of gender identity. You don't want people to you don't want to think that humans are below other species, for instance. And in one way, you can see that when we have this sense of self, when we appropriate this self, and when we want to protect it, to such an extent that we lose our freedom. No, I shouldn't say that. When we have this sense of self, so there's fears of losing. Once you have this, you want to protect it. You think if you don't protect it, you'll lose it, it will die, and become no more, and you hang on to it. So initially, our fear of birth and death was just to ourselves as a baby, surviving or not surviving in that initial moment. Later on, as we grow older, it becomes much bigger because of our sense of self. What we want to protect becomes much, much bigger. And you might ask, so what's wrong with identifying with the body, or with my family, or with communities, or gender, or species, or even the earth? Why can't I identify with the earth? Why can't I identify with a certain political party? What's wrong with that? Very often when we do so, it's not with the mind of non-discrimination. It's with the mind of discrimination that we do so. But when we do so with the mind of non-discrimination, it's different. There's an image that I really like that Tay used in his summer Dharma talks to the children. It's the image of the umbilical cord. And so when we are first going back to this child, this baby, when we are first born, our umbilical cord is cut. And we have the feeling that we are no longer connected with our mother. We're no longer connected with our mother. We have this beginning of this separation. And Tay said in one of his meditations one day, he was able to see that he had an umbilical cord. There was an umbilical cord that connected Tay to the sun. Because without the sun, of course, there would be no life as we know it on Earth. No humans as we know it on Earth. So it's very clear that there was an umbilical cord to Tay and the son. And looking further, looking deeper, he saw that there was an umbilical cord to him and so many other things, trees, animals, minerals, etc. So each day, when we practice to recognize how we are connected to everything, recognize that we do still have this umbilical cord to our mother, even our father, our ancestors, recognizing how we are still connected to all things, and recognizing our roots. That's our daily practice of trying to remove the dualistic thinking that we often engage in. And when we can recognize all of these roots, these umbilical cords that we have, we can see that our body is not outside of our family is not outside of our communities. All of these things have an umbilical cord to each other. And when we want to protect the one, we are also protecting the all. I remember when I first came to Plum Village, I was very moved when Tay shared about creating an altar in your home. Of course, growing up Vietnamese, we had an altar in our home. But somehow I had lost touch with this altar. It was just kind of like a table in our house. But I didn't really feel like I had connection to it. And then when I came to Plum Village and Tay encouraged everyone to set up an ancestral altar at home, I was very moved by it, because he said, when we are able to connect with our ancestors, with our roots, then we stop feeling so alienated. And at the time I was feeling alienated, but I couldn't identify. I didn't know that I was feeling alienated. Just like sometimes when you're feeling lonely, you don't know that you're feeling lonely until someone comes and hangs out with you, and you're like, oh, the day before I was feeling lonely, or the moment before I was feeling lonely, something like that. But when Tay shared that, I didn't realize that was what I was suffering from, a sense of a bit of an alienation. I had somehow lost touch with my roots, with my ancestors, with my blood ancestors, as well as my spiritual ancestors. And there was a little bit of suffering that came up in that. And later when I found out a little bit of the origins to this, why Tay started sharing about establishing an altar in the home, it was because he observed in the West that there was this terrible sense of alienation. Everyone was so independent, and our individualism, our sense of individuality was so strong that we'd forgotten that this is connected to this. We have our roots. We have our roots not just in our blood and spiritual ancestors, but also in the land ancestors. And one story that really moved me was during the war in Vietnam, when the troops were going through Hue. And Thea told this one time. When the troops were going through Hue, the families in Hue, what they did was, and they thought that it would stop the tanks from going through the city. What they did was they took the altars from their homes, and the altar in a Vietnamese home is kind of like one of the most sacred places, because that's where you go to, when you are getting married or entering school or getting a diploma, or your business is successful or your business failed, or whatever it was. It was kind of like news reporting, CNN. You would go to this altar. Actually, not CNN. It's kind of like your psychotherapist. So you go to this altar and you just present everything that was happening in your daily life. And you have this conversation with your ancestors, and you ask for their support. So the altar in these Vietnamese homes were something very sacred, and they always keep it clean, proper incense, flowers, and there's this ritual of keeping the altars clean. But during the Vietnam War, when the troops were coming in, so these families, some of them, they brought these altars. A place that's very sacred and you never really touch. They moved these altars out to the front gate of their home, thinking that these altars would be able to protect them and prevent the troops and the soldiers from coming in and destroying the city. Because that act was taking something that you valued the most, that was most sacred to you, and you felt that had the most spiritual authority. You brought it out and you placed it in front of your home as a form of protection. And of course it didn't stop. The altars, soldiers passed by, troops passed by, some of them even trampling on some of these altars. The tanks went through. And Tay realized that when he heard that, when he saw that, he realized that you could only do something like that when you don't see the value of these ancestors. You could only do something like that when you yourself don't have a connection to your own ancestors, when you yourself feel alienated. And he saw that the troops, they were able to trample on this ancestor because they themselves had these ancestral altars, because they themselves weren't able to connect to the significance of that, because they didn't have that practice in their daily life. They didn't have that value, that connection to the blood and spiritual ancestors. So it was very important. So hearing that, I saw the sense of introducing. After that, Tay shared about the practice of setting up an altar in your home, in every home. And even though I grew up with the altar in my home, when I came to Plum Village, I reconnected with that altar. And when I go home on home visit now, I do have conversations with my ancestors. I light up the incense. I talk to my father as if he's there. I talk to my grandparents. I talk to my ancestors, even the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, because you can have a conversation. They're wonderful therapists, They really know how to listen to everything that you have to share without judging, reacting, giving too much advice, etc. So sometimes it's a good kind of circulation to have these conversations with them. So recognizing our roots, getting in touch with our spiritual and ancestral roots, to take care of our alienation, to take care of our kind of like false sense of self, because we're not separate. We are a stream. We are a flowing stream. So today's topic was actually about moral courage. And I have 15 minutes left to get to moral courage. And I want to say, in Buddhism, when we speak about courage, and I remember this in my Buddhist youth, going to the temples, they would speak about compassion, wisdom, or insight, and courage. And these three things always go together. So it's, these, we cannot really have courage without compassion or wisdom, and vice versa. Once you have compassion, there's wisdom there, and courage is also there. So Te often speaks about the three powers, or the three kinds of courage that we can have. I'll switch over to the word power. So he speaks about the power to understand, the power to love, and the power to let go. So when we speak about understanding, we're speaking about understanding suffering. Because when we practice mindfulness, we know that a mental formation always has an object. Mindfulness is always mindfulness of something, and anger is always anger of something. So understanding is also always understanding of something. You cannot just have understanding alone. So understanding here is understanding suffering. Especially when we can understand our own suffering or the suffering of others, we can give rise to compassion. When we look at someone who's suffering, who's in a lot of suffering, or who's experiencing a lot of suffering, in our family or in our community, sometimes this suffering spills over to the other members of the family or other members of the community. And when you look at that brother or sister, or when you look at your loved one, your family member, you can see that at the time that they're suffering, they don't know how to handle their suffering. Like it could be a lot of anger or irritation, and we don't know how to handle it. And then the suffering spills over. So when we see that our loved one, this brother or sister, at the moment that they're suffering, they're not able to handle their suffering. So you see that you can easily recognize that they're a victim. At the moment, they are a victim of their suffering. And when we see this, we can give rise to compassion. We don't want to do anything that would make that person to suffer more. So in our daily lives, in our daily meditations, in our daily contemplations, we have to really train ourselves to come back and to recognize the kind of suffering that's present in us, whether that is in the form of tension in your body. Your body could have a lot of tension right now. And why is that? Maybe we haven't taken good care of our body lately. Maybe we've overworked our body. We haven't nourished our body enough. Maybe we have too much judgment of our body, and this really prevents us from taking care of our body, from really expressing the care and love that our body needs. So being mindful of our body, the state of our body, the health of our body, and taking care, that's a kind of suffering we have to address. Especially nowadays in our world, when everywhere there's a lot of busyness, everyone is overscheduled, kind of overworked. We're chasing many things, too many things, so we tend to get overscheduled, overworked. We forget to take care of our bodies, and a lot of tension builds up. So that's one suffering that we have to learn how to take care of. And looking into our feelings, we can recognize there's some suffering there too, maybe. So our daily mindfulness, our daily practice is to be able to come home to ourselves, to recognize what's going on in our body, in our feelings, in our perceptions, the kinds of feelings that are causing us suffering, the kinds of perceptions that are causing us some suffering. And we learn how to take care of them. We learn how to look deeply into them. I remember when I heard the 5 mindfulness trainings for the first time. It was in a transmission ceremony, and I wasn't a part of it, but just sitting in the audience and hearing the reading of the 5 mindfulness trainings. I was so moved, I just started to cry. Because before that, I thought I knew myself. I thought I knew, sometimes in our naivety, we have this sense that, oh, I'm a good person. And when I go home, I recognize this in my mother too. She goes, oh, I'm a good person. What do you mean? I don't make anyone suffer. Anyhow, the first time I heard the 5 mindfulness trainings, the reason why I cried so much was because I realized I had done so many things that made so many people suffer. The 5 mindfulness trainings, they start with aware of the suffering caused by, and then list a number of actions. I am determined not to, a number of actions, and I'm determined to cultivate, then a number of actions. But they really help us to look deeply into suffering. So suffering is not just an abstract thing, but it applies to so many different areas of our life. In how we think, we also can contribute to suffering, to harm. In how we speak, we do a lot of damage, a lot of harm. In how we consume, we also do damage, we do harm. And when I heard the 5 mindfulness trainings for the first time, I realized, spelled out so clearly, so many areas that I had contributed to suffering for myself, my family, and also for the world in general. So I just sat there and I cried. Later on, when I read the 14 mindfulness trainings, I cried even more because it was spelled out even more. The many different ways that still even more ways that we can cause suffering to ourselves and to others. And I find when we speak about moral courage, this is a term that I keep coming across in kind of the collective consciousness now, in the media or in the voice of the young people. Very often I'm picking up this term, moral courage. And it kind of brings me back to that time when morality or things has to do with being a good person or not a good person, or choosing the right thing to do or not the right thing to do. But it wasn't so much about the awareness of suffering, the different kinds of suffering that are going on in the world, in ourselves and in the world, and how we're contributing to it. So sometimes I hear the young people say moral courage, but there's that question, is it just about being good or not being good for them? Can they see clearly? Can we see clearly what this moral courage, what it takes to have this moral courage, and to look into our ethics and our values. So the 5 mindfulness trainings and the 14 are an expression of, concrete expression of global ethics. And I do hope that they can be shared more widely in our society, so that those naive young people like me back then could see more clearly and have a chance to learn a little bit more about the different things that we do that contribute to harm, to suffering, or actually some of the things that we do that are contributing to happiness. I have 3 of the trainings kind of here. And when I said the 14 mindfulness trainings, when we read them, I cried even more because I realized even more ways that I was causing harm. The 3rd mindfulness training is aware of the suffering brought about when we impose our views on others. We are determined not to force others, even our children, by any means whatsoever, such as authority, threat, money, propaganda, or indoctrination, to adopt our views. I used to bribe my younger brothers with money so they can agree with me. So I was quite guilty of that, yeah. I also threatened them by withholding, time, energy, money, or material resources when they didn't agree with me. So I was really guilty of this. And we will, however, learn to help others let go of and transform fanaticism and narrowness through loving speech and compassionate dialogue. This training really opened up new doors for me when I first read it, because before I thought, well, very naive idea, everybody has a right to believe in what they want to believe in. And I have a right to believe in what I want to believe in. And somehow in my mind, dialogue wasn't so possible. It's just, you believe in what you want to believe, and I'll believe in what I want to believe, I don't need to listen to you because it's fine what you believe. And I'll believe what I want to believe. And in that kind of thinking, there wasn't so much dialogue. It was kind of like a passive kind of agreement, passive kind of peace. There wasn't much dialogue, there wasn't much understanding. So these trainings really were doors for me to look at suffering much more deeply, at the ways I thought or at the ways I was behaving that had contributed to suffering. So understanding is one of the powers that we can have, and understanding suffering especially. Tay said that we can be victim of fame or success or wealth, but we can never be victim of our understanding. So we can, the more we understand, especially the more we understand about the suffering that's going on in ourselves and in the world, the more courage we have. It's a kind of spiritual power. The second kind of power is the power to love, and or the courage to love, and we can see that oftentimes it's easy to love things that are pleasant. Or when we look at people around us and we think, oh, I really love this brother, I really love that sister, she's so joyful and kind and, very helpful all the time. Those brothers and sisters are easy to love. So we think, oh, they're lovable. But Tay says that may not be true love. It's kind of like just an enjoyment. You just enjoy their presence. But in terms of loving, that may not be the case. So sometimes we have to kind of challenge ourselves a bit to love those who are difficult to love, because then we can see the limits of our own love. We see the limits. For instance, in America right now, there are a lot of protesters. You may or may not agree with their view. And the protesters, they may trigger feelings of discomfort in us. But are we, rather than writing someone off, rather than saying, oh, these people, they're causing suffering. Why are they causing suffering? Can we see them as a flowing stream? Can we hear their suffering? Can we take care of the suffering that's being triggered in us in order to hear the suffering that is being said, being voiced? Because sometimes when we hear, like I'm one of the sisters in the hamlet who likes to problem solve problems. Somehow I don't know, something in my character that likes to solve problems. So I end up having a lot of sisters come to me with problems. It's kind of like a mini protest. You can say, and sometimes when the sisters come to me with a problem, oftentimes the way they are sharing it with me, it sounds like I'm being held accountable for this suffering, for this problem that's going on in the hamlet, like, and when it's being shared like that, oh, you have to do something about this because you are one of the sisters who are in the front row or something like that. And then I get triggered. So at this moment I have to breathe. I have to come back to my breathing. And I have to stay with my breathing. I have to embrace the feeling of discomfort that has just come up. And if I don't do this, I won't be able to recognize what the real problem is, what the suffering is. Because all I'm hearing is, why is this person holding me accountable for this? What do I have to do with it? I didn't cause that problem, for instance. Or even if that problem was there, and my ancestors had caused it, it's all over. Why are you holding me accountable? So all of these things we have to recognize in ourselves when we get triggered, when feelings of discomfort come up, especially when someone is expressing a kind of suffering. We have to be able to come back to our breathing and really anchor ourselves in our breathing and allow so that we can have enough strength to listen to what suffering is there, what suffering is trying to be expressed. Otherwise we can easily dismiss it. So it's not easy to express your love to someone who is saying things are unpleasant, or to you that are unpleasant, or doing things to you that are unpleasant. But that's our chance to come back. Come back to our breathing. Come back to our awareness that this suffering is there because there's no solution to it yet. The suffering is there because we don't have an answer to it yet. So if we say that I don't want to hear about it, or it's your fault, or something like that, then we never figure out a solution to it. And we come back to our breathing to see that, again, we are a stream, and the other person is a stream. Especially with the protests that are happening in America over injustice. I remember when I was young too. It was about. I thought, well, if you knew how to handle the kind of discrimination in the mind, if you knew how to kind of change your mind, if you know how to change your attitude, if you knew how to, work harder, etc., then you'd be able to address you'd be able to solve your own problems. You'd be able to address the suffering. But it's not that simple. It's not that simple. Because there's a systemic aspect. So when we say, oh, this suffering comes from this stream of ancestors, this 100 years of oppression, or 100 years of few hundred years of slavery, for instance, we cannot just say, that's over. Now you can work harder. Now you can do things to change your life. It's not that simple. Because actually we are a part of it. We are a part of it. Every one of us is a part of it still. So to say that that person or that group of people just needs to work harder or change their behavior is not enough. We also have to change our behavior. And also the systems. So the last power is the power to let go, the power to cut off. When we, let's say when we have anger in our heart for a long time, or resentment towards someone, and finally we're able to let it go, or begin anew and to let it go, we feel really light. We feel at peace again. There's a story that the Buddha told about the cows. I think you've all heard this one already. So there's this farmer who had lost his cows. The Buddha was somewhere, and there's this farmer who had lost his cows, and he went past the Buddha and the monks and nuns, the monks, the bhikshus, and he asked, "Oh, have you seen my cows? I've lost them somewhere. Without my cows, I won't be able to do the harvest. I'll lose everything." And he was really suffering over this. And the Buddha said, "No, I'm sorry, I haven't seen your cows. But maybe they've gone in that direction." So he went to look for the cows, the farmer. And when the farmer left, then the Buddha said, looked at the bhikshus, and he said, "Aren't you glad aren't you happy that you don't have any cows to lose? We're much more luckier than the farmer. We don't have cows to lose." And so in our life, we can reflect a little bit to see what kind of cows do we have that are causing us, that are a bit heavy to hold on to, whether it could be a responsibility, a home, a mortgage, a bank account, I don't know. What are a relationship, a difficulty? What are some of the things that we can release and let go of? And when Tay told this story, he asked us to write on a sheet of paper all of the cows that we have right now, and whether or not we can let go of them. And our cows could be views. It could be a view about ourselves that we need to let go of. Sometimes that's a cow too. Oh, my body is not beautiful enough. Or my body is not healthy enough. That's also a kind of cow. It prevents us from really getting in touch with ourselves, with our body, and taking care of it. It may be a view about our family, our communities, our political party, for instance. Our cows may also be our ideas about happiness or success. Only when this person wins the presidency will my country be happy. For instance, that could be an idea that prevents us from being happy, although it's a very strong one and difficult to let go. So ideas about happiness or success or views are sometimes more difficult to let go of than even possessions. Many of us, we're here in Plum Village. We've chosen to leave our home behind, our cars behind. We come here and we live in community, one bed box. Or if you're a lay friend, one bed. Sometimes you don't even have a cabinet to put your things in. But we've chosen to come here and let go of our possessions. And those are the easy things to let go of, our worldly possessions. But maybe our ideas are much more difficult to let go of. Ideas, even when we're here, how Plum Village should be. Ideas about how I should practice. Ideas about what happiness is. So letting go, learning out how to cut off, letting go of our ideas. And the more we let go, the lighter we feel, the happier we feel, especially ideas or views. So to sum it up, when we look into moral courage, when we look into how to have moral courage, I think first of all we have to look into our fears. what are the kinds of fears that are operating in our lives right now, in our daily life. Especially fears that center around self-preservation. Because when if we can't recognize these fears and how they are operating, when it comes down for us to make a decision, our decision will be based on fear. So in our daily lives, we want to look deeply into our fear and to kind of help to remove some of the fears that we have. Looking deeply into our fears, and then looking deeply into our sense of self, how we appropriate a sense of self. Can we let go of our sense of self to touch kind of a higher truth? And we have to also cultivate our understanding of suffering. When we want to be able to make better choices, better decisions, have the courage to stand up for something or to speak out against something, we have to be able to understand the suffering that is there. And the more we understand about the suffering that is there, our compassion, our courage, our insight is much bigger. So it's much easier to act. I remember in Plum Village, when we first, so our community was not vegan for many, many years. And one year Tay decided, okay, Plum Village is vegan. Plum Village is vegan. So many of our brothers and sisters who had grown up in the West and used to cheese and eggs suffered so much because suddenly we were vegan. But Tay had heard the dialogue, and Tay had heard the sharings, all the sharings about the different kinds of suffering that is inflicted on the animals, on the planet Earth, when we consume eggs and dairy products and meat products, etc. So he had heard the suffering, so he made the decision. The decision was made out of an understanding, a very deep understanding of the suffering that was there right now. And then even while that decision was made, there was a bit of suffering in the community. There was a lot of resistance, but again, it took some dialogue. So again, we heard more about the suffering that was happening to the planet, to the animals, to the minerals, to the earth. And then it became quite easy for us to stick to the vegan diet. Or for the community to agree to this. We're not perfectly vegan yet, but at least on our serving tables now, there are no dairy products, no egg products, etc. So learning how to recognize the suffering so we can give voice to it, so we can speak out about it. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to the talk today. And again, happy 94th continuation day to Tay. It is thanks to Tay's wisdom, courage, compassion that I think we are here today. And today we can celebrate Tay's wisdom, courage, and compassion. We can celebrate Tay in every breath that we take. We can celebrate Tay in every step that we take as well.